Hello, horrorphiles. You're listening to Dissecting Horror,
examining the anatomy of fear in film, television, and literature.
I'm filmmaker Stephen Aguilera.
I'm writer and performer Kelsey Zukowski.
In this episode, we dissect the film Stopmotion, now streaming on Shudder. This dissection will be spoiler-free.
We are the Horror Whisperers, your champions of horror. I will, and we hope you will subscribe for more, won't you?
A talented stop-motion animator becomes consumed by the grotesque world of her horrifying creations, with deadly results, according to Rotten Tomatoes.
I have a deep love for stop-motion animation, even more so when it digs into a macabre set of characters with an explorative spirit. It's a niche subgenre that has a way of satisfying the spooky, whimsical nature in me, both exhilarating and soothing. So a dark psychosis, artist obsession horror film utilizing the creepy yet fantastical nature of stop-motion animation and exploring the level of meticulous dedication, time, passion, and imagination that stop-motion takes? Yes, please. I had high expectations, and this film still managed to surprise me with how utterly it tantalized and spoke to me with every vividly haunting and visceral frame. Last episode, Steve talked about how Interview with a Vampire was all the things that intrigued and enthralled him in a horror film. And I have to say, I think stop motion is a perfect example of that film for me, and has an offbeat experimental style and eerie tone, powered by many gripping themes that are incredibly relatable to the artist's journey, such as the duality of creator and creation, the fear of never having an original or true voice, and the daunting reality that you can give all of yourself, flesh and blood, to your craft, and it still may never be enough, while artistically exploring a surrealist stop-motion art within the art concept through my two favorite types of horror, psychological and body horror.
Our main character, Ella, played by Aisling Franciosi, yearns for self-identity, a voice and life of her own, after living as a mere extension, a puppet, if you will, to her mother, a legendary stop-motion animator stricken with arthritis, necessitating the use of her daughter's hands to perform the storyteller's work. Ella's mother, Stella, played by Suzanne Blake, a refreshingly pronounceable name for a change, is insufferably strict and overbearing, crushing her adult daughter's creativity and growth. I find that situation to be a clever setup to a horror story about stop motion. However, it did take me 2 viewings of the film and thoughtfully working all that out in writing to actually process and appreciate what was there. Perhaps I'm just not that observant or deep, but I also don't feel I need my hand held with every detail spelled out. But I couldn't decide if this film as a whole was either so deep that it was incomprehensible to me, or there was only an apparent deepness with little actually happening to make sense of. It was either trying to feel deeper than it really was, or was deeper than I was picking up on. Regardless, a good balance had not been struck between clear storytelling and the all-too-abstract art house Dario Argento vibe, to the point of divorcing me from much I could relate to. Not everything has to be so mainstream and on the nose, but I also need to be able to follow and relate to the story and characters without the film aspiring so hard to be high art.
Interesting. So not even as like a fellow artist or in horror artist specifically, you didn't feel like you could relate to any of like the themes that were being explored here?
No, it reminds me of my teens where I had many friends who were into stop motion and into makeup effects, and we were just so into that sort of art form as it relates to film. And I felt a surge of warmth tingling over me at the sight of the stop motion itself, but the characters and the situations they're in this film did very little.
Okay. I figured we were either going to really, really agree or really differ on this film, which is fair. It's, very experimental and artistic, and I think it's something that's really going to be evocative and connect to someone, or not at all. Aisling Franciosi, which I did look up, and that's the pronunciation. Apparently, she has so many mispronunciations on her Twitter. She spells it out right under her name with like a winky face, kind of like comedic, like, I know you're going to get this wrong, so this is how you say it. So, she delivers a powerful, captivating, evocative performance as Ella. She reflects much of the complexities of her inner being, from the conflicted emotions of dealing with an overbearing, narcissistic mother while still wanting to do right by her, to her passion and desire, to digesting how so many around her underestimate and devalue her creative spark, to little flickers of madness and the thought of what it might be like to truly let go, to embrace your impulses and to say to hell with it, and the impossible task of trying to adhere to other standards. While some of this is supported in dialogue and the story we are given, much of this is conveyed in a look, without a word needed from Franciosi, the more fitting for a character who struggles in finding her voice and even having the chance to let it out. I didn't place her at first, which is often a good sign of an actor falling into their roles, but she also gave an incredibly powerful and harrowing performance in the historical drama turned revenge piece, The Nightingale, and a strong supporting performance in The Last Voyage of the Demeter more recently. She has proven her ability to tackle complex, dark material in a very raw, emotive, human way that can speak to an audience. Hopefully we see her in more horror going forward. Kaylin Springall, as the little girl, is just as captivating, capturing both the imaginative, daring, spirited spark of childhood, not yet worn down by adulthood and second-guessing, and honoring the delightfully morbid inclinations that many would be afraid to suggest. Her energy, mannerisms, and delivery feel very authentic to a child of her age, while still holding an ethereal, commanding, and knowing nature that helps power the story in a satisfying direction. She also had a strong performance on the newest season of Doctor Who in the episode Boom. Between the two, it seems like a promising start to her career. The cinematography and overall visual style partners vibrancy and nightmares so well throughout the film. It feels very indie and experimental, which I mean in the best possible way. Every part of the film simply oozes artistic expression and contemplation on the passion of that calling, and even where the dangers lie in losing a part of yourself to it. You can never get back. The art within the art of Ella's stop-motion film captures both the childlike wonder, simplicity, and fear and evil in an unsettling and spirited way. The set of the stop-motion film is simple and familiar, yet offers an eerie and trapping atmosphere for the girl who was created to face the Ashman, a man of nightmares and dread. As the mad ambition sets in, Ella, throwing all of herself into the story, slowly becomes her waxed art, escalating us to that oh-so-satisfying body horror. While body horror is more often portrayed through rotted, flaking, and bleeding out, the body slowly and gruesomely falling apart until there is nothing left, or one is perhaps reborn anew, I appreciated this more unique take on body horror, utilizing a horror in not exposed flesh or rotting, but becoming something inanimate and seemingly made of artifice and imagination come to life. Things do take a bloody turn, showing the desperation in Ella and a great representation of putting your blood, sweat, and tears into your passion project, which should be enough for those who want that bloody body horror while being subdued enough that most normally averse should be able to handle it. It's actually the connective exploration and symbolism of the wax allowing her to become something new, or perhaps simply reveal what was always under the surface, waiting to be brought into creation, that is more horrifying. It's this angle of body horror losing oneself and bodily autonomy and its psychological ramifications that offers the most creepy and harrowing moments and visualization and an impact as she fights to her last breath to not let her work go unfinished, no matter the forces against her.
Aside from that occasional juicy body horror, the best part of the film for me, by far, was the actual stop-motion sequences themselves, which comprised only a few brief moments scattered over the film. I've always been very fond of that aesthetic. The story and the stop-motion animation itself she is creating does not seem to hold much significance or parallel to what's happening in her life or with her fate, at least that I could figure out. How is this symbolic of anything or furthering the story's theme? Felt like a missed opportunity. Or did it make sense to you?
I think it kind of, one of the main themes of this film, I think, is fear in many different ways. So I think it almost kind of reminded me a little bit of The Babadook, which was a film I liked like 90% of. I loved 90% of when I watched it, but like the ending really didn't set well with me. And then once I kind of understood more the intent and the mixture of needing to view certain elements as like a real monster or terror that was really happening, and then also being able to realize what it symbolized to the protagonist in it, essentially depression, that there was an element that was real, but really like at its core, it was more this like manifestation. It's, again, they're both very like psychological. So I think it's more of like that exploration of one's fear. And in this film, her fear takes many different forms, but fear of control, I think, is like a big source of it. And that is kind of shows in many different ways. So I think with the film within the film is more kind of taking that in a more traditional horror, just survival or just this looming, mysterious, scary figure coming after you in this entrapping setting, and kind of giving into that in a way. And for her, in her real life, there's a lot of different fears, but like one thing that it goes into is definitely fear of control, of not having a voice, of like not creating something that matters, of I think even validation, especially with the relationship with her mother. Some of it, they didn't have to spell out too much, but some of it you can assume if she kind of followed her path. Likely narcissistic, and the mother probably never really gave her much encouragement or validation. It seemed like that kind of dynamic of someone who can never really quite live up to their parents', high expectations. But there must have been something that kind of sparked this, this love of this art, that was given by her mother, even while constantly demeaning her and telling her you're not doing this right and all of that. So I think there's, it was kind of a more traditional horror sort of mirror image of more human everyday fears that she was facing in a long answer.
Well, that's an interesting interpretation, but I'm feeling like you're maybe having to stretch a little bit to make it fit, make it work. I don't know that it doesn't feel like it would be that obvious. If that is in fact what they were going for, I don't know that they did a very good job of putting it out there. But something about good art is that it's open to interpretation and allowing each of us to look at things in a certain way that we can reflect on and has meaning for us. So I'm down with that. One empathizes with Ella to the extent that no one would want to live a life like that. But aside from the undeserved misfortune of her plight, I felt little or no empathy or rooting interest for her. Although I did not dislike her either, I was just not able to connect. I was not convinced the torment she experienced under her mother justified the psychosis she was manifesting. Sufficient trauma had not been set up to make her behavior make sense. I can see how living for so long under that level of suppression could make someone crack. However, her mother's stroke and coma early in the film should have been liberating for her, if anything. Yet she remains tormented in a further deteriorating state. I get that people can be crazy for inexplicable reasons, even when brought up by loving parents, but aside from her oppressive mother, there was no real motivation for her emotional and mental decline.
I don't know. I think I viewed it less of, was she just so traumatic to make this reasonable? I think I viewed, like, obviously this is really happening to her, but I think a lot of it was just this exploration of artist obsession, and that if you're an artistic or creative individual, it's like this just need in you where even if you think, okay, I don't have a voice, or can I make my own way, I think that almost doesn't even register with her, because it's just this need. She doesn't, not even just not knowing anything else, it's just that genuine drive and passion in her that she's just determined to make something happen. So I think, I don't know, like I didn't necessarily, I mean, it's really happening, but I didn't take every moment literal of like, would a person really do this just because they're parent was narcissistic and dying, because that's true of a lot of people and they don't go off the edge like that. But I think it was more just about exploring, I think, very relevant themes. And I think you could even view some of that, especially the body horror, as it takes on this sort of the creator and creation kind of becoming one. I think that's more just a lot of people in their art, they put so much of themselves into it. And I think it even ties into very relevant, whether you're a horror, or it doesn't even have to be horror, but there is a lot of dark, taxing material out there. So whether it's from a writer-director, standpoint, and I think sometimes even more as an actor, because you have to really go there and bring something authentic of yourself and kind of be in that mindset. And a lot of times you're portraying, whether it's, based on a real person or not, you're kind of bringing alive, whether it could be a sociopathic killer or it could be someone who's just experiencing torment or abuse or anything. But there's a certain need to bring that to life in a realistic way, where you have to get in that mindset. And this balance can be really tricky, of wanting to portray it and live it, at least for that time, that short period of time when you're on set or doing a project, but then separating yourself enough where it doesn't continue to take over your mental state. And I think we've seen actors really struggle with that. And, sometimes there's other things going on in their life, depression or drugs or any number of things. But there's definitely been actors who say these characters are, like Evan Peters comes to mind, of he had to step back from working with Ryan Murphy for a bit, just because he does incredible with the material, but he's really good at playing very deranged, very dark, mentally taxing characters. And that's kind of become his thing. Not necessarily, I think he likes and sees values in it, but I remember for a time he's like, I just have to step away for a bit, because it's like having me have almost like mental breakdowns, and I just want to be happy for a little bit. So I viewed it more as not how realistic is this for a person where they're going to descent into body horror. No, probably most struggling artists or even artistic obsession, they're not going to that level. But I think there's something creative and relevant and thrilling to utilize horror to just explore and examine things that whether you as a human or you as an artist might struggle with.
Yeah, and I think what we were saying before about actors is the most pertinent and the closest to a type of artist susceptible to succumbing to mental issues, because they're putting themselves so deeply into that role. They're literally being that deranged person or whatever person that might be in a sad state that they're portraying. But in this case, a stop motion animator, I don't see that level of involvement. There's no reason it couldn't be, but it feels more detached to me because it's so slow. It's like one frame at a time. That they don't have, it's not like getting lost in it in that sense. It's more like it's paced in a way that you're always able to judge on a technical basis each frame that you're doing. You're focused on that technical aspect to where you're probably not going to get lost in the character in its motions beyond doing that. And we have here a familiar tale of a tormented artist whose obsession or fixation crosses over into madness, with their demented art creeping into their mind, nightmares, or reality, yada, yada, yada. Like many tropes or cliches, I can't quite put my finger on 100 other instances I've seen of this, but I'm sure they're there.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about it being a more technical art form and maybe being a little more removed. In a way, I definitely think actors would be most susceptible, because even as a writer, I've written some very disturbing, traumatic things, and you are kind of in that dark place, but I don't know, I feel like it's a little easier to pull yourself in and out of it, where especially like if you're an actor and you're on set and it's go time, like obviously different actors will handle it differently and can more be in this traumatic, intense place, and then camera cuts and they're themselves and they're joking around. Some people have to stay a lot more in character, which potentially are these traumatic, isolating places more. I'm probably more on the later half of that, of where I really want to stay. Like if I'm a character who's being traumatized or is going through something where she's questioning her own reality and being attacked in, all of these different ways, and is very alone, and depressive thoughts would come, along with that. I'm usually like where I just I can't let myself be happier or joke around. Like I almost have to pull myself more away and stay in that dark place. I guess maybe doing more indie films and not being able to like section off as much time as someone like, for example, Heath Ledger stayed in this hotel and hotel motel, I don't know, but basically shut himself away from the rest of the world and society and tried to get into that dark, chaotic nature of the Joker, and had one of the most brilliant performances. And again, there was other things definitely going on. It's not like he had no issues in life whatsoever, and then he got in character and did one film. But I think there is an element there of him so successfully getting into that dark, maddening place that I think it did affect him mentally, and at least being somewhat of a factor in, what ultimately happened to him. Yeah, I think definitely actors, I think it's most difficult with, I think before I was going to make almost a joke of, I love and I'm so fascinated by stop motion film, but it is so tedious. Like, I'm glad I can appreciate stop motion as a viewer and not have to create it, because I think in so many, even film, is a slow process from writing a script to, everything that takes place, even once you're on set and filming, to slowly making it come to life. But it's like a snail's pace by so far in comparison for stop motion. And I feel like it could be a maddening process where I could kind of see the madness hitting in sooner. But I also feel like, not that it's more imaginative than other creators, but if someone's arm moving and just, could create something so big, like in your mind, you have to see so much bigger than what you're having happen inch by inch, frame by frame. So I think there's also an element of you have to have a very vivid kind of, explosive imagination and mindset, which could be wonderful, or I could see it kind of taking away from you. And I think a big part of the concept and point of this film is basically kind of exploring things like even Frankenstein, of just creating something and losing control of it, and your kind of monsters coming back to come alive and reverse the roles in a way.
Well, I'd imagine for as tedious as it is to have to move something a couple millimeters at a time, to have to draw in cartoons the entire frame just to have it move that equivalent would be even more daunting. But patience is a big factor. And I do think what you're saying about having that overall vision of where things are going, especially if you're animating several characters at once, or like a Ray Harryhausen thing where a thing maybe have 10 arms and you got to keep track of where each arm is moving and you can't, mess that up. That's impressive. Yeah, there's much to be appreciated there for sure.
Yeah. There are ample creepy moments, and fear is a definite driving force here, but its objective is not for a quick shock, scare, or creep out moment. Its ambitions and intent run a little deeper. There is a genuine, the monsters we create have a power against us angle, where stories and artifice collide with reality and personal truth, which does show a real threat to our protagonist, but the inner battle is just as fierce. Among this traditional fear, it tackles things like the fear of invalidation, not being able to create something that matters, and control being unreachable, turning to ash and falling into the wind, much like her created monster, the Ash Man. I found the pacing and stop motion to be perfect. It gripped me from the beginning with a striking, enchanting, dreamlike style, added constant foreshadowing tension and eerie escalations, while taking enough time on our protagonist's story and struggle, making us invested in her plight for artistic satisfaction, even while she fell farther away from the world around her, which really speaks to that fragile balance, especially for those who put themselves in a mindset of dark fictional settings. We all have our own preferences on ambiguity versus the more clear-cut. I can see for some this might come across as too literal or on the nose with its metaphors, as characters do literally spell out some things to come, or things the character is most threatened by, like you will never have control, and then seeing how trapped she is, or even her mom calling her a puppet constantly, as she is controlling her to control the puppets, and then diminishing her ambitions to contribute ideas and have a creative identity of her own. The puppet, of course, is a fixture of their art, but also puppets were considered a small figure of a human being used in sorcery. Again, used by another without having the power herself. For me, I appreciate it all, taking very human fears and anxieties, especially regarding artistic ambition and need, but could also apply to many other areas in life. I loved how it utilized the horror genre to show what that would look like if used as a literal cage of sorts. I don't mind some having to go back and think what something might have meant in films, especially the more artistic. Sometimes it offers more power to a story, allowing each viewer to take away what it means to them. I also don't love when I watch something and everything is so vague, unclear, and up for interpretation that it doesn't manage to affect or stimulate me, or even let me walk away feeling like I really knew this person's story or what it meant to its creator. I want to have a sense of the creative intent if it's an exploratory and thematic piece like this. I want to go on that exploratory journey with the director and everyone else who brings the film to life. Stop motion offered a good balance of exploring many connective themes through haunting, symbolic visualization, taking us on a thrilling journey of creative fulfillment and personal destruction in equal measure, while still letting there be some room for wondering and interpretation. Which I guess was not the case for you, but my opinion.
Fair enough. I didn't get the sense that any specific supernatural element was actually present, though perhaps there should have been to suggest some alternate explanation for what was happening.
No, I viewed it as like a descent of psychosis, really just of this mad ambition, and again, like a look at how much you have to throw. Well, no, maybe not have to. Maybe it's, I guess, maybe a little more of a forewarning of having that desire and want and need to throw all of yourself into something, blood, sweat, and tears. But there kind of being a line that if you give yourself too much, especially to something with dark material, then it can destroy you.
Although I don't take this as an overt point of the film, this does tap into a topic which has always bugged me. One where artists are conflated with psychosis, as in the true creative spark stems from either heavy drug use or that all true artists are crazy, or at least weird, some sort of link between artists and madness, that sort of thing, which is nonsense. In my observation, artists are really no more crazy than the rest of the general population. They may or may not be more dramatic, expressive, or artistic about how they go about their eccentricities is all. Look at any film set and you'll find it filled with talented professionals, mostly artists, conducting themselves as sanely as anyone else.
I don't mind the exploration because I think it's interesting. And even if you, again, I feel like I'm not taking this 100% literal, so I can understand that exploration of kind of giving yourself so much that what's left when you take up who are you and who is your identity outside of this, and there's not really any balance in her life and things like that. But it's absolutely wouldn't be fair to say, oh yeah, all artists are crazy. And I think it's just because some of the best art comes from very dark, real things that happen to people. And I think it's a beautiful thing of art to be able to take that pain or that struggle and using art as like a catharsis for it to understand what happened to you and how it changed you and kind of create something positive out of that. And usually it helps other people. So it's like taking something damaging and just bringing all this good out of it in an authentic, true way. So I feel like that's more where I think it comes from. But definitely there's a lot of people who portray very deranged, dark characters or music that's very dark. And so many people say, oh, yeah, this is like the nicest guy. And, you know, so it's definitely not, I guess, let's not believe in the stereotype, but you can acknowledge that. I mean, yeah, that's true of anyone. Like, you don't have to be an artist, but there's a lot of people who go through very traumatic, hard things in their life. And hopefully, if it's not art, they find another way to kind of digest that and kind of rebirth something in themselves that allows them to maybe acknowledge what happened to them, and maybe it stays with them, but they're still able to kind of create something positive going forward.
There's something mysterious about artists in people's eyes because they're set apart from normal folk in a lot of ways because they have this ability to create on a level that is almost magical, if they're good artists anyway, that transcends reality, and they kind of create their own reality. And it's a fascinating exploration. And when an artist is off balance for whatever reason, it's probably going to express that, or she, in a way that is more interesting, and it kind of taps into that fascination about artists. And so it makes for an interesting story, or it stands out in a way that perhaps does so more than if a bricklayer flipped out or something. So I get that, and I don't think this film is trying to make any statements about that necessarily, but it does, even if inadvertently, lean into that a bit.
I really appreciated the score and sound design. There was a lot of use of sound effects, such as the sounds of tearing flesh or creaky puppet movements, interwoven into the eerie, tension-building score, hitting on the drive and reality of our protagonists and creating a sinister sense of anticipation.
I do agree about the sound effects, and was thinking at a few points where visually it wasn't too much happening as far as flesh being peeled. It was almost like a sliver of something was coming out. I won't give anything away, but the sound was just so squishy and made you go, oh, it heightened it to such an extreme. Yeah. It's a testament to how powerful the soundtrack is when it comes to body horror alone.
I will say that I don't get like cringy ooh moments a lot while watching horror, but that was one for me. I think partially the sound and just my own experiences. I've dislocated my kneecap 3 times and had surgery, which was probably like getting over that surgery is probably like the most difficult time I had in my life. And I can, again, my leg's better, but like I still kind of feel it. I feel that kind of connected thing. So body horror connected with even minor surgery, and again, the placement tends to get me a lot more. So it's also could be a little personal thing, but yeah, it got me. It wasn't a lot, but I feel like, again, it wasn't like, this isn't like a over the top, super gross body horror film, but it had enough of those moments, I think, to appease people who normally like that.
The score, however, if you want to call it that, is closer to sound design here. An assortment of grating, screeching string instruments, among other experimental fare found in countless horror films to the point of cliché. I do love these sorts of disjointed orchestral horror tones when used sparingly or to punctuate a moment, but when it's used as actual score for prolonged periods, it becomes a bit random and uncreative, even if it does fit the mood well and feels too generic, even lazy. I have a series of sound libraries that I don't know, they just let a bunch of violinists and other sorts of performers do random screechy sounds, and they're very handy when you need a moment that just sounds creepy and weird. but it's not like I feel like I'm a composer when I'm using one of these sounds. And so for me personally, I think watching this film, even though I'm sure they had actual hired performers do all this, I felt a little bit like, that sounds like something that they could have just gotten from a library. It didn't sound like somebody put a lot of thought into arranging music to specifically fit moments. It was more, you could have placed this or that there or there, and it just had a tone or feel to it. So I liked the sound of it, but I don't think it was next level. It just felt a little bit lazy.
I can see how you felt it was overdone, especially with like the puppet sounds, and as the film goes on, that's more and more, which again, it worked for me, and I thought it was creepy, and I think it worked with her becoming more and more of her creation. But there is a lot of it, to be fair, so I can see where it would be too much, and you're like, okay, we get the point, work in some different sounds.
For me, this commits the most atrocious sin of any film, horror or otherwise. It bored me. I must have checked how much time was left at least 20 times throughout. I expected the pacing to pick up after the first act, but it never did. And when a film fails to engage you, it's going to drag. This is one of those that feels like a 15-minute short stretched out to feature length. Indeed, if I were the one editing this at a pace I prefer, 15 minutes is what we'd be left with. 20 tops. I get that everyone has their own tolerance for what is considered too fast or too slow. Some prefer things take their time. I am not that person.
Wow. Again, another one amazing how we watch the same film and have such different experiences. Of course, like I said, I was exhilarated from the first shot, and I was like, wow, the pacing is perfect. It's constantly moving forward and giving us more and more.
Wow.
But okay. Well, so you said you would cut that much of the movie out. So I'm curious, what was like the bulk of where you're like, this is doing nothing for the story?
Well, I was looking at each scene and I was thinking, okay, what is the essence here that we need to convey? And it felt like most of the scenes were just conveying a mood. And I can see how you can't rush certain moods. You have to let it play out, and some moods are just not fast, if that makes any sense. You have to linger on certain sad moments or on moments that require a pacing that builds tension. I get that, but I can't remember the specific scenes, but I remember thinking specifically, like, this entire section could have been omitted. Or for me, because the only points that I really loved were the stop motion, I wanted to just skip ahead to those points.
Just watch that film. You're like, can I just watch your finished stop motion film and not the film outside of it?
I certainly wasn't invested in her as a character. And so I wanted her to just get over it, and I wasn't really feeling a sense of I wanted to watch her heal or support her. I just didn't care at all. And so that was the main thing. If I gave a shit about her, I would have probably wanted to be along that journey with her, but I just wasn't.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely felt connected to her, but I feel like it was more about these bigger universal themes of artists and storytelling, and even on a more human level, just validity and having your purpose and vehicle, whatever that may be, I think is what I connected to. I wanted her to like have satisfaction and to have, if it's that artistic expression in finishing her film, if that was it, then like I wanted her to have that. But I also love body horror. So I also wanted it to go there. I definitely find, I find body horror very cathartic for many reasons. I think there's just the human body can be such a range of things, but at any moment something, there is a certain fragility, and at any moment something could take over you that you don't know what's happening with you. And I think just the horror of that, especially coupled with psychological, I think is one of the most just daunting, terrifying things, like not having control of your body and then your mind potentially going with it, or having your mind and having to just deal with the reality that you have no control even over your own body, and anything can be happening to it that can be bigger than you. I'm also someone who has a good amount of health issues and been trying to figure out what those are for about 10 plus years. So there's also a part of me that finds it like actually oddly soothing to I don't know, like explore just the body just totally falling apart or becoming something new and not having control of it. And sometimes it's just a grim ending and some, but I don't know, it's almost like still acknowledging that darkness rather than I don't know, like not acknowledging it, and just sometimes the terror and mystery and not knowing what's happening even within your own blood. But a lot of them also actually like are strangely empowering in the end. So yeah, I do have, again, I like wanted her to have her like creative satisfaction, but I also wanted them to explore this descent fully and kind of give into it. So it worked for me.
Fair enough. I'm not really sure what the overall message here is supposed to be, or if there even is one. There seems to be some apparent deep meaning attempted, but I don't see what I'm supposed to walk away from this with. The entire time I had no idea where this was going, in a bad way, nor did I really care. As mentioned, I did watch it a second time to give it a fair shot. I thought I might grasp some additional sense of what was going on, but I didn't, at all. Nor did I appreciate it any more or any less. It was exactly the same experience. No spoilers, but I was hoping the ending would culminate in some sort of intense, poignant message or meaning, paying off everything leading up to it. If it did, it went over my head. It feels closer to a horror version to the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey, more like a weird nightmare, and is about as random and pointless, mixed in with some other Freudian bullshit. And what was with that slimy black egg-like thing the film opens and closes with? What does that symbolize? What the hell are you trying to say? Did you get that?
I mean, egg, I would say, represents birth.
That's what reminded me of 2001: A Space Odyssey. But it felt like it was just being pretentious, like that was an overall symbol of life that you can throw in there and people can just interpret it any way they want, but it felt like it was misplaced, and I don't quite get how it fits with this story. So I'm upset about that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that was like a key point for me. I actually really did like the ending and thought it was powerful and clear, but again, to each their own. Yeah, I don't know. I think it just explored a lot of things and a lot of themes really powerfully, where most seemed clear to me. There was some that you could still kind of look deeper into and be like, okay, you could probably take this away from this. But again, I think the main premise and point, I think, is acknowledging the passion and will and drive and like the good elements of that, of your art and your purpose and your creative calling. And I think just also acknowledging how much it takes to create art and put yourself into it, and just the connectivity of it. And without giving too much away, it was kind of addressing and acknowledging her fears beyond this Ashman, but the more kind of personal fears and things that she coped with like in her life, and putting that into, okay, those are there and they might box you, but ultimately you can still have this creative satisfaction you never knew if you would be able to achieve.
Well, I'm glad you got that out of this film.
Yep. Okay.
As a sort of plot hole, it seemed an unlikely coincidence that two characters who were not even really friends or colleagues in their field or anything would both have a strong connection with the stop-motion industry. Our stop-motion animator lead character just happens to be dating a guy whose sister works specifically in stop-motion advertising. Bit of a stretch. I think it's too niche.
Maybe they worked in like the stop-motion community, and through the sister, she met the boyfriend.
I wondered about that, and I thought, well, you know, there's probably some backstory. You know, they don't have to get into that sort of thing, and I probably wouldn't care if they did. But that stood out as like, it's not like they're both in website design.
Yeah, it's a pretty selective I guess, like, genre of film, to be fair. Like, very few. There's probably more on the, like, independent level, but at least that's, like, available to most people. It's, like, sometimes a couple years before one comes out, so it seems like a pretty rare field, to be fair.
I think there was just a need to have some other stop motion character in there to make some of these subplots come off. And they did a sloppy job of connecting these two people who needed to somehow come together. And they could have done that more creatively in a way that, like, maybe there were some previous collaboration or something they did with two people, and they could have made those two people. But I don't want to get into the story, but that bugged me. I think that was dumb.
I mean, yeah, probably was more of a critique on, like, commercialization versus, like, pure artistic intent, because, you know, she even says things like, I would die if I had to work at a job like yours, using this art form she loves in a kind of commercial way. So,
and that's fine.
Yeah.
I like that idea, and I think that should have been explored, but it's just how the commercial set of folk met with that old fine art type of folk. Just it didn't feel organic at all, and it was bad. It was bad, and I hate them for it.
Okay, wow. Stop Motion was released 1 month before Late Night with the Devil, both foreign-made independent horror films released by IFC Films that tackled their respective subgenres of horror in a unique, refreshing way. In my opinion, at least, maybe not Steve's. While there has been some buzz on Stop Motion, definitely increasing a bit with the recent Shudder release, Late Night with the Devil blew up more and had surprise success. There even being enough demand to bring it back to theaters earlier this month for a limited release, after its Shudder streaming release and reaching a record milestone for the streaming network. I'm here for all the horror successes, especially those with clear intent to bring alive horror that offers something original and digs into substance of the complexities of the human experience and the dark consequences one can face to make their dreams a reality, which both of these films represent well. I was let down with some aspects of Late Night with the Devil, but the bulk of the film I really appreciated. I definitely view it as a success, as a win for horror, and especially independent, creatively fueled horror, heavy on psychological and cultural exploration. That doing well commercially, critically, and among audiences, horror fans, and many more casual horror watchers likely, is wonderful. That being said, I absolutely feel out of the two, Stop Motion is the stronger overall film. I don't say that as an opportunity to put down Late Night with the Devil, but it did strike me as curious for all of their commonalities, including both being highly critically praised. Thus far, the buzz and fan approval on Stop Motion is far lower, being the difference. It is the more experimental and understated of the two, and it could be that more people simply gravitate towards possession and devil films over the more surreal artist's journey, body horror of Stop Motion. It feels like it's not as much a lack of appeal, but might be if you ask Steve, as much as it is just under the radar, even for horror fans. Obviously, I quite love this film, so would love to encourage all horror fans to give this one a shot, especially if you are a horror storyteller or one who simply wants to take a closer look at what a creator goes through, even metaphorically, to achieve the art that stirs your soul.
In conclusion, I have to say this was not a bad work at all. It just did very little for me. There was no connection. I didn't hate this film, but I do hate being bored. I liked it on par with the Rotten Tomatoes audience score of 49%, put it that way. You, Kelsey, seem more in line with the critic score of 91%, yes?
Absolutely. Actually, it's my favorite horror film I've seen this year.
Well, I feel as you do about Late Night with the Devil. Like, I really liked it, but there were certain points that were, whatever. And I think we're in agreement on that. We almost did an episode on that.
Yeah.
Perhaps we should have. But this film today, yeah, it wasn't up there anywhere close to Late Night for me. And I don't know if, I don't personally enjoy exorcism or devil films that much.
Me neither. But I think that's why that was honestly, well, I think it was, for a lot of people, I think it was just that the critic score on Rotten Tomatoes was so high. They're like, just for a horror film, that's just so rare that they're like, wow, this must be great. So I think that kind of encouraged a lot of people to check it out and got on their radar. But the critic score is almost the same for this film. It's 91% versus 97%. So it's really not, that different. And again, they came out around the same time, same, film distribution company, different, they came from different parts of the country, and again, different, subgenres. But I don't know. It seemed like it went a little, like, I'm not even like necessarily hearing, oh, I watched this movie and I hated it. I thought it was trash. I'm just like, there's some buzz on it. I'm hearing some talk, but not nearly as much. And just, with some of the, commonalities was just interesting.
Well, for me, Late Night it came across as more comedic and campy, and was playing with horror tropes like the cult aspect and the Rosemary's Baby kind of feel of getting your career propelled through a deal with the devil kind of a thing. And I found that just more propelling of one in just being entertained while watching it. And it wasn't so deep, and it was more cruise control. And I think that might be a more suitable or easy to digest form of horror entertainment for more people.
They're definitely very different tones. Again, they do both have kind of a focus on the psychology of the characters and what they're going through. I think it not being deep enough, though, it's like it was in the beginning, but then it wasn't at the end. That's really my biggest issue with Late Night with the Devil. I was very consumed and enjoyed the story and cared about the lead character, and I just thought everything that was happening was interesting. So I was very engaged in the story. I know for some people they're like, oh, not enough, it took forever for something to happen, I actually was very engaged, but again, I was with this story as well. But I think, again, didn't mean to obviously wanted to compare them a bit, but we don't have to go into too much detail here. But in the beginning of Late Night with the Devil, it seemed like very much trying to connect it to culture and human nature and with things that happened in that time period. And I didn't mind the turn that it took at the end. I actually thought it was interesting, but it was one of those that's like, oh, here's the shock twist and that's it. And then I felt like it didn't then connect it to this initial commentary and subtext it presented. So it just fell a little flat for me.
I get it.
But overall, I think I still appreciated that it even tried to do something new because, again, Exorcist was brilliant. It's still a lot of horror fans. The one film, they're like, oh, this is the one that still really scares me and haunts me. But I think a lot of times when there's a subgenre where there's a horror film that's so iconic, this, I think, happened with Night of the Living Dead as well with zombie films, that they find something iconic, and then every other horror film for like 50 plus years is like, okay, well, this is the formula. This is what we got to do. And that there's a lot of similar possession films that even if what they do is good and solid on screen and compelling and it's good acting and good visuals and, creepy, there's just something drastically taken away from me because it's the same story. And so I think I just so appreciated that Late Night with the Devil was like, oh no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this totally different setting, different tone, different focus. It's going to have different connections. So I think like that it was successful, independent, kind of going its own path, trying to do something different. I think that's a win alone.
I didn't even think going into it that it was more of an exorcism type thing. And I don't think they got too much into that. It wasn't really the focus of it, but the original Exorcist was such a magnificent masterpiece that I agree it set the tone and set into motion so many copycats like Star Wars, there's so many knockoffs of that and so forth. But I never got like how much can you really do with an exorcism? And I tend to go into boredom at the very thought of, okay, you're going to be stuck in a room with somebody while they're chanting stuff out of a Bible, and the other person's going to be contorting and screaming and cursing and whatever. And it's like, okay,
it's going to escalate. There's going to be a big showdown.
Yeah, and if you could do something different with that, great. But I never understood why why it's a genre at all, but people really like these things. And I've had actors say, oh, and if you ever do one with an exorcism, I want to be in that one, okay? I'm like, it's not going to happen, but great.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just, I think it's maybe that film being so iconic, but I would think it's also has to do with like the devil being this ultimate conceptualization of evil and temptation and taking over you.
Must be something like that.
But likewise, for me, I felt stop motion put a fresh kind of twist of their own identity and their own exploration on body horror for me.
And I love stop motion, and I think it meshes well with horror. I think they work so well with each other, and Tim Burton has used it a lot, and I think it's proved successful. But like, how do you make a movie out of stop motion and horror when what's happening is moving so slow as far as the artistic process of it? But when you see like the old Ray Harryhausen films with the skeletons and so forth, that vibe, I love it so much. But I don't know how I would make a movie out of that, but I would love to try.
Yeah.
And this direction they took, for me, it's not like I'm opposed to psychological thrillers, but I felt like it was lacking an authentic supernatural layer to it that I think would have somehow lent itself to a more interesting piece for me if it was just more actually scary. And not that what's in the mind isn't the most terrifying thing that could be. The stuff people do in real life is
scary in my mind. I don't know.
But I wanted to be more in a different environment and somehow transported into a different world, that world of the stop motion that she was creating. And it was great for those few seconds here and there, but I didn't feel like that even had anything to do with the story. It was just sort of this separate little vignettes of a play that were kind of irrelevant. And it's weird that I would just enjoy those more than the rest of the entire movie. If they were more dovetailed with each other and we can be more into that world, I think I would have liked it a lot more.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I felt it was just very, like, I really liked the combination of the two styles, and I definitely do agree there's a lot of great kind of creepy stop motion animation, and there's some that are full-on horror, but it's definitely a rarity. So I liked seeing the escalation and the immersion of the two and what that could create. But yeah, I guess if what was happening with her outside of the piece within the piece didn't work for you, that makes sense. I mean, usually, hey, I love supernatural, so usually I'm all for that. I don't know, I didn't feel like I needed it in this, and I kind of liked that the art and story had the ultimate power, that it was almost more haunting what you can create in your mind and what that can do to you than if it was like a ghost or vampire or something like that. I wouldn't mind if we threw vampires into this movie too, but
why not? There is an admiration and a respect I have for people who can tell an amazing story just talking over scrambled eggs. And it's like, wow, that just totally blew my mind what just happened at this breakfast scene. If they could spend that level of power and creativity in doing something mundane and make it really work, if they could apply that to stop motion or whatever the subject is, then that would have been amazing. But it's just a me thing, I guess. I didn't feel it here. I feel like this was a missed opportunity. It could have been something great, and that's part of my disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, stories either connect or don't connect, so I get it. There's a lot of things I can even love on paper, but I'm like, if it doesn't really immerse you, if you don't care, if you don't connect, then it just has no impact, and you definitely want a story to have that impact, so makes sense. Stop motion is an artistic examination of the dark side of artistic obsession and identity within the art, but perhaps even more importantly, outside of it. The film reflects a mindful examination of the artist's struggle, full of debilitating fear of personal autonomy and moments of exhilarating satisfaction when you are able to bring dead things to life, heavily playing with a connection between bringing imagination to mundanity and death to life in a new manifestation. If you would like to join our society of grotesquerie and loathing, subscribe now and give this podcast a like.
And be sure to comment your wretched thoughts below.
Keep our podcast suffering on by finding it in your cold, black, withered hearts to support us on Patreon.
A link to our PayPal is also below for one-time donations of any amount. It was nice knowing you.